Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to dive into Chapter 2, which covers medication development, regulation, and resources. I thought this was an appropriate slide. That usually is the face I make when my doctor suggests that we try a new medication. So I thought that was pretty good. All right. First, we're going to start off with some international laws. So the international regulation of medications falls under the authority of the World Health Organization, also known as WHO. This is a specialized agency, and it's underneath the United Nations. So the WHO is the coordinating authority on international public health, and they provide technical assistance in the drug field, mainly promoting research on drug abuse. Okay? Their tasks also include combating disease and the general health of all people, the general public. The WHO does not enforce laws concerning drugs, so drug control is different between countries. Some are more strict, some are less strict than others, and some may have drugs available before others. Okay. The World Health Report is an annual publication that's put out by the WHO. This combines expert assessments with a focus on special subjects each time. So it assists countries basically in making decisions on policies and fundings. The WHO also puts out another annual publication, which is the Guideline for Safe Surgery. And this includes usually topics like antibiotic prophylactics, if you'll remember from last chapter, if you remember back to when we were talking about the SKIP initiative, that would be antibiotic prophylaxis, where every patient is getting a dosage of antibiotics pre-surgery. They also this publication anyway, will also deal with adverse drug reactions and their treatment and prevention, blood loss management, safe delivery of anesthesia. Those are just a few things that are covered on this safe surgery checklist. And this should be available in most facilities, so that's a good thing to look out for and maybe ask if your facilities have in the future when you get out in the field. All right, now we're going to get into some federal laws. So federal regulation of medications was initially intended to protect consumers from medications that were harmful, impure, untested, or just generally unsafe. So with that being said, in 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed, and that set the standards for quality and required the proper labeling of medications. Following that, in 1938, the Pure Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed, and that required animal testing of medications. So before pharmaceutical companies could sell a new medication, they had to apply for approval to market the medication. And that approval was dependent on whether or not it had been tested and there was proof that the medication was effective in animals. Okay, that act was amended in 1952 with the Durham-Humphrey Amendment, and that required a physician's order to dispense certain medications. So this is where and when prescription drugs and over-the-counter medications came into play. However, even the over-the-counter drugs needed to be studied. They need to be sure that they are safe for public use. The labels must contain sufficient warnings and instructions for public use, since those are coming out without a physician's order. Okay, and then in 1970, we had the Controlled Substances Act. This is what's going to cover our narcotics. Those are controlled substances. So this act established classifications, also known as schedules, of medications that have potential for abuse. And these medications will be specifically labeled with a large C that stands for that controlled substance, and a Roman numeral in the inside of it, which will designate which class or schedule that particular substance falls into. So I've listed them here. As you can see, class 1, these are going to have a very high risk for abuse. These are your heroines, LSD, PCP, marijuana. Class 2, still a very high risk, opium, cocaine, morphine, and codeines. Class 3 is a little less of a risk for abuse, anabolic steroids and products with low doses or levels of cocaine. Class 4, these are going to be your diazepam, lorazepam, and phenobarbital. These are of pretty low risk for abuse. And class 5, as you can see, any of the antitussives and antidiarrheal agents, these have very little, if at least, or if not any, risk for abuse. And there is a table on page 23 of your textbook, table 2.1, that lists these out and has some pretty good descriptions of each class. So here is just an example of what you would see on those controlled substance labels. As you can see over here, this one here is a class 2, which is going to be your, as we said, opioids and morphines, things like that. In the middle, we have class 3. As you can see, there's the C with the Roman numerals, your anabolic steroids and products with low cocaine. And, and over here we have the class 4s. All right, so moving forward then, in 1973, the DEA, or Drug Enforcement Administration, was established. They set the standards for handling controlled substances, and they do have legal authority to enforce those standards. Okay, they are tasked with institutional policies and procedures for storing, handling, and disposing of all controlled substances. And all those institutions must comply with DEA standards. So for example, when a hospital administers narcotics, careful records must be kept. An example of what needs to be on those would be the amount, the date, patient information, the person obtaining the med, as well as the person administering it. They want to know every set of hands that has touched that controlled substance. Okay. Anyone who administers or prescribes or even dispenses controlled substances are required to have a current state license, and they must be registered with the DEA. So when they registered with the DEA, they're assigned a registration number, and that's used to track the controlled substances that are dispersed. So we're going to get into some federal and state agencies. Some of these you will be very familiar with. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. This is an agency within the Department of Labor, and their mission is to ensure the safety and health of the American worker. In 1991, the Occupational Exposure to Bloodborne Pathogens Standard was passed, and it was revised in 2001 in response to Needle Stick and Safety and the Prevention Act. So as you can see, that would directly relate to us as surgical techs. OSHA estimates that 5.6 million healthcare workers are at risk of exposure to bloodborne pathogens, and those are including hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. So the standard states that employers must have a plan in place that ensures immediate and confidential post-exposure treatment and follow-up. And these follow-ups and treatments must be in accordance with current CDC standards. Okay, so the CDC, Centers for Disease and Drug Control Prevention. This agency is under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They're the leading federal agency for protecting health and safety of people in general and providing credible information to enhance health decisions. So in 1995, the CDC issued a protocol for the emergency needle stick information, and they recommended that prophylactic medication and treatment be available less than 2 hours from the time of exposure. So if you are stuck with a needle at 12 p.m., by 2 p.m. you need to have gotten at least, the very least, your blood drawn. Those things need to be done within less than 2 hours of the initial exposure. And they also came up with the post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP. This is constantly updated with approval of new drugs and new information on the treatment of HIV. So those are made available to you, and you will be, if ever you are stuck, you will be provided information on those prophylactic medications that you can start. And finally, we have the State Practice Acts. So state governments must comply with federal regulations. So if or when a state and federal laws concerning medications ever conflict, we're going to go with the stricter of the two. So these State Practice acts are another name for state laws. So state laws are also known as state practice acts. And they govern the ordering and dispensing and administration of medications. And they do vary from state to state. So for example, they regulate who can prescribe drugs. That is regulated by the State Practice Act, meaning physicians, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. They're going to regulate who of those three can actually prescribe drugs. They regulate pharmacy practices, so how meds are dispensed and by who. They follow drug substitution laws, which specify if a pharmacist can substitute a generic equivalent for a prescribed medication. They cover those. And they also cover, the State Practice Acts cover what we as surgical techs can do as far as medication handling. They establish our role in med handling. So remember, your physicians are able to delegate some of their functions to others. As a surgical tech, you will be the physician's extra set of hands. And that being said, you'll be performing some medication handling duties under his delegation. So you need to be aware of what your state practice acts are, because they do establish what we as surgical techs can do as far as medication handling. We also have something called local policies. When state laws don't address what the practice of a surgical technologist can be, basically that's a fancy word for your institutional policy. So wherever you are at, find out what your facility policy is if there's any question. Okay, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations. This is also known as JCAHO. If any of you work in the healthcare field or out in the hospitals, I'm sure you have probably heard this acronym before. They're a stringent bunch of people. This is usually how we feel when we see them. Oh no, I see JCAHO people. So, the Joint Commission evaluates and accredits over 20,000 healthcare organizations and programs across the U.S. What's meant by that are general hospitals, rehab hospitals, outpatient surgery centers, anything of that nature is going to or can be evaluated and accredited by JCAHO. If they have that accreditation, then you know that because JCAHO is the predominant standard setting organization, facilities that have that accreditation demonstrate a commitment to meeting JCAHO standards. It is not an easy accreditation to get. Like I said, it is very stringent and very strict and very thorough. So know that if that facility has that accreditation, they really went through the ringer to get it, and they are committed to sticking to it. One of the standards is the National Patient Safety Goals. Those are established annually, and they address things like infection control, preventing wrong site, wrong procedure, or wrong person surgery, medical errors, medication errors. They cover a lot of different areas. In December of 2013, the implementation guide for surgical site infections was established. There's 23 effective practices listed there for the eradication of surgical site infections. And then in May 2005, the list of dangerous abbreviations, acronyms, and symbols was put out. This is a list of things that should not be used in the clinical setting. It was finalized just a little bit later. And it covers misread abbreviations in the handwritten form. A lot of them can be similar, and as we all know, there's a lot of people out there with terrible handwriting. So it's very easy to misread these acronyms and symbols and abbreviations. So if a facility has a Joint Commission accreditation, they must develop a do not use list, and that must include the terms specified by JCAHO. So if you see see the table on see the table 2.2 on page 25, that is a good example of a do not use list. And remember, these are for handwritten symbols, acronyms, and abbreviations. It does not at this point include electronic med records, but it may in the future. So you can ask your facilities about that as well when you get out there if they have a do not use list, especially if they're JCAHO certified. Okay, so we'll get into some drug development now. Before legal regulations were in place, drugs could be manufactured, sold, and administered without any proof of safety or quality or effectiveness. They could be sold and manufactured by anyone. Now that regulations are in place to provide these things, the process is very long and it is very expensive. So the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, this is an agency within the Department of Health and Human Services, and they inspect facilities where meds are made. They review new drug applications. They investigate and remove unsafe drugs from the market, and they require proper labeling of all medications. And it's good to know that these tasks or these duties, they extend overseas as well. As much as 80% of the prescription drugs used by Americans actually come from China and India. So the FDA does reach across and overseas as well. Then we have the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or the CDER. And these guys regulate the pharmaceutical industry. They ensure the standards are followed to include prescription drugs, over-the-counter medications, biologic therapeutics, and generic drugs. They evaluate all new drugs before they are sold, and they monitor over 10,000 existing drugs already on the market. They observe television, radio, and printed drug ads for accuracy, and they also provide health professionals with information for consumers. So these guys do quite a bit as well, and they, like I said, are the main people that are regulating the pharmaceutical industry itself. All right, so FDA pregnancy categories. These came about, these you will see a lot in surgery. If we have a pregnant woman that presents to the ER with appendicitis and needs emergent surgery, how do we know which medications are safe to use based on how far along she is in that pregnancy? That's exactly why the FDA developed a classification system, and it's directly related to medication effects on the unborn child. So this is just a very brief overview on this slide of what they are. If you refer to page 26, table 2.3 in your text, it gives you a much more detailed description of each category. But there are 5. A and B are considered safe for use in surgery. A presents no risk to the unborn child or fetus. B, there was no risk in animal studies. Well-controlled studies in pregnant women, though, are unavailable. It's just assumed that there is little to no risk. Okay, C and D, the risk versus benefit of the drug are yet to be determined, or must be determined. And for E, the risk to the human fetus has been proved, and the risk outweighs the benefit, so we should avoid that during pregnancy. But again, refer to page 26, and that will give you a good overview of those. Okay, so next, guys, we're going to get into a little bit of a sensitive subject. It will be brief, but we are going to discuss the FDA testing, which does include animal testing. I know this is a sensitive subject for some, so fair warning, we are going to get into that now. All right, so for FDA testing, new drugs, as you guys know, are continuously being developed. Each must undergo extensive testing before FDA approval. Only about 5 in 5,000 enter preclinical testing and will progress to human testing. And after that, only 1 is approved. All new medications are first tested on animals to see if they are safe to administer to humans. And of those animals, at least 2 species of mammals of both sexes must be included for those first stages of testing. Okay, during that time, during the animal testing, we are looking for researchers are watching for a few different things. They're looking for toxic effects. They're looking for safe dosing levels as well. So once the drug has been proven safe in animals, the drug company at that point can apply to the FDA to begin testing on humans. And there are 4 phases of human medication testing. However, I like to say that there are 5 because they recently added phase 0. So we'll get into those here on these next slides. Okay. So as I said, phase 0, this was just added in 2003. It's known as human microdosing, and it's designed to speed up the development of new drugs. Okay, it's a way to discover if the drug has the expected outcome from preclinical trials. It's used as an exploratory first in human trial. Okay, so they're looking to see if the effect that they expected in animals is going to as well be seen in humans. It's a single very small dose to a very limited number of people, usually 10 to 20. And it's just gathering preliminary data. It's not designed to report on the safety or the efficacy of the drug because, like I said, we are giving a very low dose to have any kind of therapeutic effect. It's really just there to study and decide which have the best effects in humans to move forward with human testing. Okay, so we're looking more at side effects here. We're not looking for the drug's efficacy to treat the disease. So then we move on to phase 1, and this is clinical pharmacology. So the new medication is given to another small group, usually 20 to 80, of healthy volunteers or of those who have the disease or problem condition that the new drug is meant to treat. Usually males are in this group of 18 to 45 years old, and it's used to determine dosing levels. And this phase can take 1 to 2 years. So as you can see, this is where we're getting into the very timely length of phase testing. Okay, now we're going to move into phase 2, which is the clinical investigations. So in this phase, the medication is given to a large group of people, usually several hundred. It's going to be patients that have the disease or condition that the medication is meant to treat. And it's used to establish effectiveness and determine the optimum dosage and the dose range. Okay, and this particular phase can take up 1 to 3 years. Then we move into phase 3. And this one, we're calling it the clinical trials. We continue to note the effectiveness, safety, and side effects in large groups. This phase will only begin if there were no serious side effects that occurred in phase 2. In this phase, the medication is given to hundreds or even thousands of patients, usually in large medical research facilities. And the effectiveness is verified and actions are characterized of the medication. Several kinds of studies are conducted in this phase. A good example of one would be the double-blind study. And that is where half the group receives the medication and half of the group will receive an inactive form called a placebo. Neither the patients nor the physicians know which group received which form of the medication until the study is completed. And these findings will be thoroughly documented. And this phase also takes several years. Okay, from there, we move into phase 4, which is the post-marketing study. This occurs after the medication is released for use and treatment. Drug companies monitor the medication, getting results from prescribing physicians. It includes results from those patients that were also excluded from previous phases. That can include the elderly or pregnant women. And the data is gathered, it's analyzed and reported to the FDA. And the time frame for this phase varies from medication to medication. They are all treating different ailments and in different forms and different time frames. So this is a variant on time for this phase. Okay, then we're going to move on. Finally, at the end of these medication testings, we get into what is referred to as pharmacogenetics. You may also hear this interchanged with pharmacogenomics. These two mean basically the same thing. Here is a drawn out definition of it: the study of genetic factors in predicting a medication's action and how it could vary from its intended response. In shorter terms, we are just saying this is the general study of genes and genetic technology that are going to determine how the medication is going to behave. We're predicting the medication's behavior. Okay, this is vital technology though. People, as we know, have different genetic makeups, and they're not going to respond identically to medication dosages or to the intended therapy and how the medication should react. Genetic factors, as we know, can alter the metabolism of a medication and either enhance it or they could even diminish it. So this is vital technology. The pros of it, as we said, it could facilitate new medication discoveries. It could develop drug markers to target specific diseases. Previously failed medication candidates may be matched with a specific population in which they can participate in studies and have access to medications that may not have been accessible to them before because of different makeups or ailments. And it can facilitate the medication approval process. It would lower the cost and the risks of clinical trials. However, on the flip side of that, where there are pros, there are cons, and this type of study is very, very complex, and it's very costly to get started. So we'll go from there. All right, so we'll move on to some marketing here. During development, drug companies will assign a generic name to their medication. Once FDA approval is gained, it will then select a company trade name. The U.S. Pharmacopoeia and National Formulary assigns an official name to the drug. That's usually the generic name. Okay. Once it's approved for release, the developing company owns exclusive rights to market that drug under the trade name for 20 years. That's called a patent. It allows the drug company to recover some of their development costs. However, remember that official trade name is given during the clinical trials once it's approved to market during that phase 4. So it can end up only being 7 to 12 years that they own that patent because it is still in the trial phase when it's given. Okay, so we're going to move into some names of drugs, brand names, trade names. And this is absolutely me trying to say a generic name when I see it on TV. 15 letters and no vowels. All right, so medication labeling. The manufacturer's name for a medication is also known as the brand name, the trade name, or the proprietary name. Those are all interchangeable. Normally you will hear it as either the brand or the trade name. Those are interchangeable. This is selected by the manufacturer and it's used to market the drug. So it's usually the most prominent word on the label. It's always capitalized and it's very, very visible. This is their selling point. Okay, and it's going to be followed by the registered symbol, which is the R with a circle around it, meaning that the name and the formula are registered with the FDA. Okay, directly under the brand name is going to be the generic or official name, usually in lowercase letters because it's not owned by any one company. It may be in parentheses as well, and this is given to the medication, remember, by the USP. So it has to be by law on all labels. And sometimes you may see the chemical name as well, which is just the chemical formula that's really only used by chemists. Okay, we're also going to find the manufacturer's name. We're going to see the dosage strength, which refers to the weight or the amount of medication in a specific unit of measurement. So for example, it's just going to tell you how much is in the vial, okay, the strength. We're going to see form, if you remember from chapter 1, whether or not it's a tablet or a capsule, a liquid, a suspension, is it an ointment? That is what we mean by form. That will be listed on the label. We're also going to see the supply dosage. That refers to the dosage strength and the medication form. So for instance, if we have some heparin for whatever reason, whatever surgery, it may read 1,000 units per 1 milliliter. So that's what that means by this here with the X measured units per quantity. That's how it would read on a heparin bottle. And we'll have an example of that in just a little bit here. Right, we're also going to have the total volume. This is the full quality that's contained in the bottle or the vial. So for solids, it's going to be the total number of individual items in the package. So for example, if you have a bottle of Zofran, which are tablets, so they're an anti-nausea, it may say 15 tablets. That's going to let you know that there should be 15 tablets in that bottle. Okay. Then we're going to have the administration route. As you remember from chapter 1, that's going to be, is it PO, to be taken orally per os? Is it going to be subcutaneous injection, IM injection, through the IV? Is it topical? That's going to cover our administration route. And then we're going to see label alerts. These are just warnings. Keep out of light, refrigerate. If it's a suspension, it's going to say shake well. One that is specific to, or we will see a lot as surgical techs in the OR, are local anesthetics. A good visual cue is to look for red lettering on the bottle or the vial that it comes in. Red lettering often indicates that that local anesthetic contains epinephrine, which your surgeon will specify to you whether or not he wants. So that is a good visual cue. Okay, moving on. We'll also see the expiration date, which will read by month and then year. Outdated meds should not be used. They should be removed from shelves and returned to the pharmacy if you see that they are outdated. We're also going to see lot and control numbers. If a medication is recalled, this number helps us identify the specific group of packages that need to be removed from shelves and returned to pharmacy. And this number is required by federal law to be on the label. We'll also see sometimes some barcode symbols. These are used in sales, but they are also used, as we learned in Chapter 1, for patient identification, matching them to the correct med. They're used to document med dosing and for record keeping. The FDA estimates that there will be 500,000 fewer medication adverse events over the next 20 years once the barcodes are used to automate medication documentation at the patient's bedside. So we're looking to move out from surgery and extend that to medication documentation bedside as well. And as you can, that's a pretty drastic drop in errors. So we are working towards that. We're also going to see the National Drug Code. Every prescription medication has this on the label. And we'll also see those USP and F codes as well. So here is a little visual. There are also some more in your books. But as we said, like down here for the heparin, you can see it in all capital letters, so we know that that is the trade name, heparin. We see here it is for sodium injection, and there's our USP. And as I said here, it says 1,000 units per milliliter, and this is a 1 milliliter vial, multiple dose 1 milliliter vial. So we know there are 1,000 units of heparin in here. Okay, we see over here it's derived from porcine intestinal mucosa, if you remember from Chapter 1. It gives us some storage parameters. And as you can see here too, manufactured in India. So that's where those FDA reaching overseas come in. Up here on the left, we see we have 20 milliliters of lidocaine, 1% with epinephrine. And there's that red lettering that we were talking about as a visual cue. Here's our national drug code. Okay, so then there's the lot number and our expiration date. This is probably on the outside of the box. These numbers are actually on the bottles that came in. And over here we have Augmentin. This is an antibiotic. We can see here the total volume is 75 milliliters when it's reconstituted. So this is in powder form. Once we add that water and reconstitute it, it will be 75 milliliters of amoxicillin. This here is the registered trademark right here, this R. And we can see that this one is an oral suspension. So if we remember correctly from chapter 1, suspensions need to be shaken. And if we come over here, you can see it says shake vigorously to wet powder. Okay, the dosage is not here. It's in with the additional, prescribing information along with the box. But here's our drug code. Here's our strength and formula. So those are just some examples that you can get a visual cue on. All right, guys, and finally, I just want to make sure that we emphasize that as a surgical technologist, you are the last quote-unquote checkpoint before the surgeon administers medications to a patient. So you need to be sure that you are visually confirming with your circulator what medications you are putting on your field. They're going to read the medication and hold it up for you to see before they pour it to the field. So once they've done that, it's important that you look at the label and read it back to them. You know, I'm giving you 1% lidocaine with epinephrine. Expires May 2021. They're going to turn the bottle to you and you're going to read back to them 1% epinephrine, May 2021. And then they'll pour it to your field. Once you have that, make sure you put a label on it on your field. 1% lidocaine with epi. And then when you draw it up in the syringe, you're going to label that as well. 1% lidocaine with epinephrine. And when you hand it to your surgeon, you're going to repeat 1% lidocaine with epinephrine so that you are that constant checkpoint before the surgeon administers any medications to a patient. Just be sure that you are labeling in a clear and understandable manner. And finally, here are just some medication reference sources for you. The physician's desk reference has been around for a very long time. It was first published in 1947, and it is published annually, and it includes hundreds and hundreds of drugs, their indications, effects, dosage, administration route. It is kind of the Bible of medications. The USPNF also puts out an annual publication, and I've listed their website here. It is listed in your text as well. The American Hospital Formulary Service, that is also a website that is listed in your text. This one is considered unbiased because the pharmaceutical companies are not the sole providers of the information that's contained in it. So they all provide great information. This one's just considered a little more unbiased. And then there's the facts and comparisons, and I included this website as well. It's just kind of an interesting website to get on to and poke around in. It gives you comparisons and tables for over-the-counter medications. So it's an interesting website to get onto. All right, guys, and that is the end. That is it for Chapter 2. Please remember, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, to include them there in the Ed Puzzle, and we'll go over them in class. And I will see you guys in a little bit.